Hello everyone, welcome to Living History and the last episode of our special Gallipoli installments. Peter Hart and I have been touring the ground of Gallipoli for the last 4 days now, and it's been quite a wonderful experience. Thank you for joining us for these special podcasts. It's been great fun to make them. And of course, it's Anzac Day. We've had a very special Anzac Day, not the Anzac Day you would typically expect. It has not been all commemorations and marches and the sort of things we normally do. We're here at Gallipoli, and we've chosen a very special way to commemorate Anzac Day. Pete, thank you. Welcome back for the last time.
Delighted to be here, and we're outside, au natural, so to speak.
I should mention that as well. We're not in the last podcast we've just done from the hotel. We're certainly not there now. We are out and about. We are sitting on the top of a fort on the top of Kilat Bahir Plateau at Gallipoli, overlooking the Dardanelles. It's very special. I'll take some photos and video to show you where we are, but it's a magnificent spot. And what a great way to end not just Anzac Day, but our 4 days of excitement in Gallipoli.
Certainly is. It's been another cracking day. I mean, a day, as always with Gallipoli Day, tinged with a bit of sadness and thinking about what happened so long ago. But on the other hand, trying to get out and learn more about it, which is our main focus on a trip like this. Trying to understand what happened, why these things happened, and what was it that made these terrible events unfold as they did? And I think we got a bit of a big answer to that, which we'll be talking about later on.
Yeah, we've had an interesting perspective from my point of view, especially because we've been to a number of places today, Pete, that you've been to before. But it was my first time visiting several places today. And as I've said before, that you've got to know every chapter of the Gallipoli story, and we covered some very interesting ones today. So, why don't we delve into it? Where do we begin? Well, we didn't begin straight away first thing in the morning. Anzac Day, I had quite a few media commitments this morning, so we had a late start, but we eventually got out on the road sort of mid-morning. Where do we I can't remember. Where did we head first?
Well, first we headed for the Quadrilateral.
Oh, of course.
Which
at Cape Helles.
Cape Helles, which was one of it's called the Quadrilateral. It was one of the main Turkish fortifications on the Karabağ Ridge, which is at Helles, one of 5 ridges, which sort of think of your hand with fingers. And
I should point out that the whole time we've been around Cape Helles, every time I've asked Pete for some sort of orientation, he stuck his hand out at me. And there is a reason for that. The Cape Helles battlefield does, if you've got an incredible imagination, in some weird way look like the back of someone's hand. But every time it was a funny scene. Every time I'd ask Pete for an indication of where we were standing, he'd thrust his hand towards me and start pointing at various parts of his fingers. So tell us about that, Pete. Tell us about the weird hand gesture, what it means, and how it works.
If you put your hand out in front of you, it's a bit like Helles looking down from your sort of wrist bone, which is like Achibaba. And then if you look down, if it's your right hand, then your little finger is Gully Spur. Then the gap between them is Gully Ravine. The next one's Fir Tree Spur. The gap between them is Krithia Nulla. Then Krithia Spur, Achibaba Nulla, Kerevsdare Spur, and Kerevsdare, which is another Nulla. And it sort of helps people remember. I hope I've got it right.
And you can trust me when I say that Pete did have his hand stretched out towards me then when he was describing this.
I would never have remembered it any other way.
So we went and explored the French sector today at Cape Helles, as you were saying. We were at the Quadrilateral. That was a really interesting spot. Again, it just summed up all those things that we'd seen before about Turkish defensive positions that were captured by the Allies during this campaign. It doesn't matter whether you're at Anzac or Suvla or indeed Helles, as we were today. It just sums it up. Turks on the high ground with very good fields of fire.
Brilliantly sighted, wasn't it? We were nothing but admiration for the Turks as people who could dominate a battlefield by well-sighted redoubts, place that allows them to dominate areas that we have to cross for a successful attack.
Well, you said it really well today, Pete, that it's something I hadn't quite thought of, but that we always talk about Gallipoli in terms of where did we go wrong, and I think a fresh perspective that this trip has given me is just where did the Turks go right, because they defeated us soundly at every turn we made. They were there to meet us. They defended brilliantly, and the work that we've done over the last few days has given me an incredible perspective on just what a great job the Turkish fighters did. So we shouldn't see Gallipoli as a failure from our point of view. We should see it as a very successful operation from the Turkish point of view.
Absolutely. And the French, for it was them, they did eventually capture the Quadrilateral, but it was a terrible battle. It's a real shell-torn area. Very unusual at Gallipoli. You are very good at doing it. Found loads of bits of shell, indicating that. Because they only captured it by putting a whole sort of 2 divisions worth of artillery onto it for a solid bombardment, and they took it when basically the defenders were all dead, and the area shows signs of that heavy fighting to this day. It's one of the real killing grounds of the peninsula. It's like the Gully Spur we were on yesterday. It's like the Neck. It's like these places, but we just haven't heard of it because it's French, and because, as you rightly pointed out yesterday, the French don't care much about it. It's not in their it's not the history they choose to remember. They've pretty well written it out. I mean, and that means for us it's part of our job to remember it, and because they contributed a lot to the campaign.
As you said, I really enjoyed, like I've done at several places over these last few days, walking the ground around these strategic points, just looking for relics out in the fields. Not to keep, not as a collector, but just to tell more of the story, to find a tangible connection to the fighting that went on. And as you mentioned a minute ago, this was the only place I've seen at Gallipoli where there were large numbers of shell fragments. So these are rusty pieces of high explosive shells. So the shells have fired, they've exploded, jagged splinters have flown in every direction. And on the Western Front, when you walk around, you see lots of chunks. It's the most common thing you see on the Western Front, big chunks of shell lying out in the fields. The only place I've seen that at Gallipoli was here at the Quadrilateral. But it wasn't just shell fragments that I found. Lots of different things, shrapnel balls and pieces of shell and various bits and pieces. But really interestingly as well, I found a bullet, but not from a rifle. It was a pistol bullet. And I looked it up later. I took a photo of it and looked it up. It was a French pistol round which had been fired. It had rifling marks on the projectile. So this was actually the projectile that had come out of the barrel of a pistol, and I could see rifling marks on it which indicated it had been fired. And I've got to say, Pete, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but when you hold an item like that in your hand, I cast my mind back and I think about some French munition worker back in France who made this projectile, perhaps a female munition worker made this projectile, loaded into a cartridge, put that cartridge in a large case and sent it off with thousands of other rounds, probably millions of other rounds, and it crossed oceans and arrived in Gallipoli where it was unpacked and then distributed to the men. And then some individual soldier took that round amongst others, loaded his pistol with it, then carried that pistol into battle. And then what happened? What was this? Was this a round that was fired triumphantly as they captured the position? It was a round he fired as he was finishing off the Turks? Or was it a fearful round that was fired? Was he being overwhelmed by Turks at the time and just managed to get off a round before they killed him? We'll obviously never know, but these are the things I think about when you touch those tangible pieces of history.
It's fun. It gives you that connection. It's a word we sometimes overuse. I know I do, and other people do. But it gives you that connection with the past. You'll never really know, will you? But you can. It makes you think, and again, that's what it's all for. Make you think about what's happening and why it's happening.
After the Quadrilateral, we moved on to another sector in the
towards
in the
the Kharevsdare Valley. Yes, the point about the French position was that they were on the right at Helles, and that meant that they were fired at from the right-hand side all the way along from the Asiatic side of the Dardanelles, and then they're forced to face almost inland with their back to the straits by this huge gully, the Kharevsdare, which crosses across their front, on the Kharevsdare spur. This is all a bit complicated without a map, I accept that. But what I want you to imagine is that the French ended up being fired at from basically 3 sides. There was only the British sector where they weren't being fired at, and you can't entirely trust British artillerymen. And that meant the French were in an awful position. They have the Ravine du Mort stretching across their front as well, and then the Quadrilateral. But we went down into the Kharevsdare, which was a very steep drop into a flat bottomed valley, and there they actually had a shared well. And we couldn't find it. I found it once before, but the valley bottom was flooded, and we got.
Explain that to us. A shared well? You mean a well that was used by both sides?
They had times, basically. The French are pragmatic, and so are the Turks. They're not like us British and Australians who fight about anything. They just had times that they'd use the well, and they tried to keep away. I'm sure there were arguments and the rest of it, and fatal disagreements about the timings. But they used the same well at the bottom. there were lots of, the French Foreign Legion were around there too, and I think I pointed out to a spot on the beach where they used to bury the Turkish corpses, and the crabs would dig them up and sort of, feast on them, and then the French Foreign Legion would feast on them and put them in the fish soup, the crab soup. I've forgotten the name of it but lots of interesting and good stuff. And we could see stretching up this very steep. It's cliffs, isn't it? Really, Matt?
Oh, it is. It's rugged country. I mean, we talk about the rugged nature of Anzac, and you don't see that often at Helles, but there's parts of it that are impassable and terrible places to fight.
And the French used built up barricade trenches, sometimes called sangers, but barricade trenches of stones, and they still stretch up the side of the valley, very imposing. And there's great pictures of the French holding them. The French fought hard until mid-August, early August really, and they just stopped, and they just then live and the live and let live system that the French do. I mean, they did it on the Western Front in sectors as well.
That walk through the French sector was really quite revealing. I really enjoyed it. It was it was an area that I hadn't spent. I'd read about it, but I hadn't studied in great detail, and I certainly hadn't visited it in any detail. I'd been to basic areas like the French cemetery, which is massive and thoroughly should be on every person's list when they go to Helles. But I hadn't walked through that area, and it was really just a lovely area, very picturesque, looking out over the Dardanelles. But again, tough country, and on the very right flank of the attack, so exposed from every side of the peninsula.
And the walk out was a laugh. We planned to go on this path that would sort of slowly go up on the cliff, but I lost my nerve and turned right too early.
As we said yesterday, if you're at Gallipoli, the rule is always go left. But we broke our own rule. We went right, and it wasn't too bad.
It was a good climb, but it was a climb up. It wasn't a cliff. It was a steep climb, and we came out by a huge dugout, which was of interest. We didn't crawl in it. It looked filthy. And then walked along the cliff top, where again we had fantastic views across the Dardanelles.
Found a nice Turkish bullet, which was good.
You did, which I think there'll be pictures up on, and great views back across the Dardanelles towards Dardanos and places like that. All told, it was a lovely walk, and then we finished up at Abide, the Turkish memorial, and we also saw some archaeological diggings that they've been doing, and that sort of made us think just the long history of this. It's not. I mean, Gallipoli was 1 year in thousands.
Those archaeological diggings were very interesting because we just stumbled into this area at the top of the hill, and there were trenches cut out, like not trenches as in the military sense, but excavation trenches that archaeologists had dug there to explore nothing to do with the Gallipoli campaign, to explore ancient ruins and we saw evidence of them. They were like ancient walls which could have been dating back for thousands of years, that had been excavated in these pits up on the top of the hill.
And tiles, and
unexpected and amazing.
And then we walked through a large, heavy French gun battery site, and then looked at the walls of Elias, I can't pronounce it, which was a Trojan town, which was where the Abide, where the Turkish memorial is, which was, it just makes you realise history goes on much longer than any 1 year or two and the rest of it. So
it was a fascinating insight. And then really the main part of the afternoon, we then left the French sector. We drove back up the peninsula, still at the Cape Helles area, but we went to where we are currently sitting now. We've spent several hours up here at what's known as Kilid Bahir Plateau. I want to talk about this, Pete, because it's important to the campaign because of what didn't go on here during the campaign and probably should have. But let's start. Can you give us the geography so that we understand what we're talking about? Give us the geography and explain why this place, Kilid Bahir Plateau, is so dominating on the peninsula.
Well, the peninsula is entirely dominated by the Kilid Bahir Plateau. It is a huge geological massif, a large high plateau that dominates the peninsula, north, south, east, and west, if you like. It controls it controls the peninsula, and we knew that. So what happens is, and it's the same joke as last time, that the first day we were meant to take Achi Baba, which lies to the south of Kilid Bahir, with terrible ground between it. But then the Kilid Bahir is like a wall in front of what would have been the British. And then while they were meant to be doing that, the Anzacs were meant to be taking Maltepe on the first day, which then would look across to Kilid Bahir, but give no real chance of getting up here. The second day they were meant to take this feature, and then the third day the fleet would go through, and then, as you said, it would rain beer. Hooray! Good times. But when you sometimes I think historians should be made to come up here, and the reason is, well, how would you describe this as a geological feature, as a battlefield feature, Matt?
I have to put this in some perspective. Is that wherever you drive around on the Gallipoli Peninsula, you see Kilid Bahir Plateau. And I should point out, the fighting never came anywhere near here, of course, because we got hemmed in effectively on the beachheads, was where we ended the campaign. So we never captured our first day objectives, let alone what was going to come in the days following. So in the whole 9 months of the campaign, we never got close to Kilid Bahir Plateau. What this has done for me is it's the big what if. Let's imagine for a moment that, as ridiculous as the Gallipoli battles that took place were, imagine they had actually worked. Let's imagine we'd been successful in what we wanted to do with Gallipoli. The places we were fighting are virtually nothing on the peninsula. They're easy compared to where we are. I cannot stress how massive this place is. It's massive when you see it from the bottom, and when you climb up to the top, which took us probably an hour and a half of uphill climbing to get up here, this thing is huge. I don't know what percentage of landmass it occupies on the peninsula, but it's a lot. And it just made me realise, Pete, it gave me this perspective I've never had on the Gallipoli campaign. I knew the Gallipoli campaign was a folly and never should have occurred. But all of a sudden, it threw things into perspective in a way I'd never seen. And it made the things that we were trying to do at Anzac and the things we were trying to do at Helles seem unimportant. And the reason I say that is because let's imagine the Anzacs had been successful and had managed to capture the objectives that they never took, like Hill 971 and like Chunuk Bair and eventually Maltepe. Imagine they'd been successful and had taken these places. It wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. This area is so massive. The Turks could have defended this so strongly. The land mass is many times larger than the entire area captured by the Anzacs in their whole time at Gallipoli. So it just says to me that the main battle that would have occurred had the thing we know as Gallipoli been successful would have been disastrous for the Allies. The Turks would have occupied this impenetrable, huge, almost a mountain range in the centre of the peninsula. So even had we achieved what we fell short of on the beaches of Gallipoli at Anzac and at Helles and at Suvla, even if we had achieved that, which we didn't, but even if we had, the main battle was yet to come on this plateau. And I don't want to bang on about it too much, but standing up here on top, doing that long climb, it was a long uphill climb to get up here. You get up on top, and I arrived on top, and I expected to be looking out on a view, and instead all I saw was this huge plateau stretching before me. I said to you, Pete, that if the Gallipoli Peninsula was a coffee table, the Kilid Bahir Plateau is a brick in the middle of that coffee table. And there was no good plan for how the Allies were going to deal with it.
No plan whatsoever.
And in reality, they weren't going to deal with it. Even if they'd been more successful on the beaches, even if they'd managed to push inland, they were never going to be able to take this position from the Turks. And so what that says to me, the entire Gallipoli plan, operation, campaign was a waste of time. It's a terrible conclusion to come to. But
especially on this day.
It was never going to work. It was never, ever, ever going to work. The worst military plan that I can think of occurred here.
It's wish fulfillment. It's you want something to happen. You really want it to happen. And where we're sat now, and if you look over my shoulder, Matt, you can see direct into the back of the forts. This is the position they wanted. They were right to want it, to make it their second day objective, but no plan to take it, no means to take it. They haven't got the troops to take it. So it's just wish fulfillment with no chance, no hope of success. And so many people died today, 104 years ago, and in the coming months. And in my view, the Western Front isn't the futile campaign. That was fighting the main enemy on the main front. This is the futile campaign.
I should point out here, especially on Anzac Day, we're not denigrating the troops in any way. This is what we remember about Anzac Day. People ask me this all the time. Why do we remember Gallipoli? Why do we remember this first Anzac Day? And the reason is because the troops did such a wonderful job in impossible circumstances. And this, what we've done today, Pete, what we've discovered today sums that up. That what I'm criticising here is the concept, the idea, the strategy that we could have gone to Gallipoli and had any success on the peninsula. We never should have been here in the first place. It doesn't diminish what the men did and what they died for and how well they fought and the sacrifice that they made. And that will always be very, very important. And I will always go to Anzac and my heart will be filled with admiration for these men and what they achieved. It was a wonderful thing that they achieved in impossible circumstances. And I was angry when I came up here today because I was very angry because I stood up here and I just thought of the incompetence of the minds that put this plan together and decided that this plan could work. Therefore, men should land on the beaches 104 years ago today and should fight and die for what I now feel, having looked at this, was an impossible dream. But I don't want to be too negative about it. It's just an interesting part of the history. It's a wonderful thing to come up here, to stand up on this high ground and just to see the monumental task that the Anzacs had in front of them, that the British and French had in front of them, and again to reinforce the wonderful job the Turks did of defending their homeland, which at the end of the day was the reason that the Gallipoli campaign was not successful. Do you think I'm banging on too much about it, Pete? You know a lot more about this than I do. Have I assessed that well?
I'm absolutely in. My first book was called Defeat at Gallipoli. I've always blamed Churchill and the cabinet members who failed to stop the campaign. I blame the generals who had a can-do attitude, that they really knew that it was doomed to failure, but they persuaded themselves that they could. They were relying on totally inadequate forces, some of them not properly trained, and they were relying on the Turks being useless. They thought there might be trouble on the landings. They thought they might suffer heavy casualties on the landings, but they thought that, they hoped that the Turks would not put up a stiff resistance beyond the beaches. How wrong they were and how many people died in proving that.
Thank you, Pete, not just for today, which was pretty special, but for the last several days. I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to the podcast and seeing the photos that we've posted to Facebook and Twitter and other social media. The next thing is when I get home, I'll be editing the videos together to tell this story in even greater detail about what we did every day. So I hope you'll tune into those when I upload those to YouTube and Facebook. But Pete, what a privilege to be here with Peter Hart. I mean, I can't say enough how wonderful it's been to walk this ground. This man, for everyone who's listening, just knows his stuff better than anyone. So do yourself a favour and buy his books, because they do summarise the Gallipoli campaign brilliantly. And if you are fortunate enough to come on a tour with him, you won't regret it. This man knows his stuff better than anyone. Peter, it's been an absolute privilege. Thank you so much for your hard work, your occasional misdirections, but your best efforts out on the fields, your great company over cold beers at the end of the evening. It's just been really special. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. What a great time we've had.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.